Besharam.
What?
Besharam Behaya.
I offered you. I don't offer you now because we're gonna go live.
Oh, we're live right now.
Yeah, that's why I didn't offer you. You're like, I'm gonna go live. Stop it. I'm gonna have no shame. He'll eat anytime you're in live, you know.
Mm.
No shame, Saeed.
All right, bismillah. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Mad Mamluks. My name is Sim. Along with me are my co-hosts, Mort
Assalamu alaikum.
and His Eminence, Sheikh Amir. Assalamu alaikum. Make sure you comment in the comment section below, like and subscribe if you haven't done so already.
I noticed that my lighting looks more ambient today. Doesn't it? I feel like I'm yellowy. Like at night, I like it.
Yeah, the background is yellow.
Oh,
too.
yeah, but it feels nice though. It feels like it's like a little, like I feel like I'm in a candlelit setting, and Sheikh Amr and you are like in this bright hospital room. Like spotlights are on you. But I like this.
The listeners are asking, who's the Besharam here? The Besharam is Mort, who's scraping his ice cream cup right here.
It's
right
I've
before the
been
show.
eyeing this, and Sheikh Amr was eyeing it, so I offered it to him. He's like,
No, he was.
and then Sim didn't want to take it. I didn't offer him because he's about to start the show. And for those who don't know, Sim is like a perfectionist, and he's like, "We're about to start. Stop, guys!" So I didn't offer it. I was gonna offer it later, but then
He was calling it Bisham because there's a noise he was making right before we started the podcast.
Yeah.
So then he offered it to us. But thank you for the offering.
What kind of ice cream is that?
It's Luigi's Real Italian Ice,
Oh, Italian ice. That's like the shaved ice, right?
shaved ice.
I don't like that one bit.
Oh, really?
really-
I
I like-
love shaved ice.
I like cream.
Italian ice is nice.
I love shaved ice.
Is it cream?
No, it's different than ice cream. Obviously, ice cream has a whole
It's
different.
like
level.
sherbet.
There's no milk in it. There's no dairy.
Oh, it's stuff with a love.
I like it.
It tastes nice. It
Yeah.
tastes nice. It's good
Look,
once in a
look.
while.
Halka.
Yeah,
You know, they
is
say
halal.
light. You know?
Right.
Especially for lactose intolerant. It's decent trade off.
Well, it was sitting in my fridge, in my freezer. I mean, for a couple of days. And I'm like, oh, I haven't had a chance to eat it. And I'm like sitting there, I'm like, ah. And they
Gotta
wanted
go.
to eat it, and I'm like, I was in the mood for it. So I'm like,
Are you lactose intolerant?
nope.
No. Sheikh, are you?
I don't know if I'm lactose intolerant. If I have something too milky like ice cream, my
Yeah.
stomach will be a little weird for a while.
Yeah.
A few hours, nothing major, but I don't like it.
So speaking
don't
of
like the
that,
feeling.
I had a horrible incident as a child. So, you know, when you're young, right, you have milk in the fridge, right? And I was at someone's house and I was wanting to get cereal in the morning, right? And they had that brand cereal, you know, the one with the squares. I don't know if you remember that. It was like a grain, but it's like grain. They call it brand, anyways, right? And so it was like a square and grain. It was really good, but what happened was there was no more milk. Oh, I thought it was milk, but it was half and half. So I made the whole bowl half and half, and so I'm drinking. Oh, it's so sweet, it's so good. I'm eating it. I enjoyed it, right? But then, a few minutes later, man, that combination of the heavy bran, like, you know, granola and wheat, and then, like, you know, and then the half and half, man, I had runs, and I was like, ugh, it's coming from both mouth and behind. It was coming from everywhere, bro. And then I'm like, oh my god. Then I realized, I thought for the longest time it was that cereal that did it to me, but then I realized I got older, it was half and half. Like, no, there was half and half in it, but. Yeah, so never
that's rough.
mistaken half and half for milk.
Lesson learned.
It'll make you go crazy.
Lesson learned, man.
Yeah.
Well, Shabab, things are still, I guess the better way to say it is the temperatures are climbing in the Middle East. The IDF recently raided a hospital in Jenin. They dressed up as nurses, hijabis, as well as some doctors, and they went and they executed prisoners who were, or they were patients who were from Hamas or Islamic Jihad, and violating every international law where you don't kill patients in hospitals. Hospitals for time immemorial have been sacred ground. You don't kill people in hospitals.
Not to mention there
I mean,
was an
these
older
guys-
woman. There was one older woman who got killed too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I mean, we're talking about these laws as if they
They
actually
matter.
apply to the IDF.
Yeah.
They don't care. They've
Yeah.
destroyed how many hospitals already? But the idea that these guys just operate with impunity throughout the world without anyone saying anything is just insane.
Yeah, that's how they got full of themselves. My question for you guys is, because I didn't read much into it, were they actually Hamas and Islamic Jihad
Yeah.
patients that they killed?
They were the organizations Hamas and Islamic Jihad did confirm that it was their soldiers who were. One of them was in coma. Can you imagine executing someone who's in a coma? Where's the honor in that?
Yeah.
Forget about international law and stuff. We know they don't care about any of that. But as a soldier, you know, you're killing someone who might be your mortal enemy, but he's incapacitated. You know, it's like killing someone in his sleep. Like, there's no honor in that.
That's why
Like,
that's
even-
what the rhetoric leads to when you refer to them as animals, human animals. You refer to them as rats. It's like just exterminating a pest, and it doesn't matter if it's in a coma. I mean, like, this is their mindset, right? The other thing I think that's worth mentioning and worth delving into is, in their mind, the evil and the satanic behavior of these people is that it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as honor for them. It's just squishing the pest for them. That's all it is for them. And that's what it's become for them. Obviously, they're going to have major PTSD, and they're going to be regretting a lot of this murder and kill that happened. You know, it's only a matter of time where a lot of them, I'm definitely going to predict that a lot of these people are going to end up killing themselves. And they're definitely, especially when all this kind of boils over, if it ever does, you're going to have a huge number of people that are killing themselves, and they can't live with themselves because they're going to have to be alone after all this is done and it calms down and they're not in this anymore. And they're definitely going to.
You'll be surprised, Sheikh. I think there might be a certain percentage that do that, but the human psychology is geared to justify all kinds of atrocities.
Yeah, I know.
Every kind of horrible things. The people, I don't know if you heard about that old documentary. What was it? It's about the 1950 Nakba expulsion. Tentura. And in it, they have these soldiers who are laughing and they're talking about how they killed these people. Some of these people justify things in all kinds of crazy, justifications where they see themselves as the hero of their story.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, like MBS, you go ask him, he has all kinds of justifications.
Yeah.
All kinds of different reasons why they are on the truth and why they are doing what they are, and they are the hero of their story, and I was just telling you guys, the listeners and you brothers here, about how I've been going through the Sirah with my children, and we're in the section where we talk about the Quraysh and how the Quraysh were offering the Prophet ﷺ all these different types of deals and bargains and stuff like that. And I can't remember the name, but one of them, he says, after he rejected it, he's like, first he's like, why don't you bring an angel? Why don't you bring two angels? Why don't you bring me a stairway to heaven where I can see your God? And then he laughs and he interrupts himself and he says, no, even then I won't believe you. So these people, because they've believed in a story or a amalgamation of things related to their greatness and why they are justified in being who they are and committing the injustice on other human beings.
You mentioned that, and we're talking about Israel. One of the wisdoms of Allah mentioning Bani Israel in the Quran to Muhammad sallallahu, not only just to strengthen his resolve, but to let him know that history repeats itself. What do I mean by that? For starters, there's a direct connection between the belief in Allah, your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and your heart being sealed, right? Think of that as the outline. If you go below that a little bit, below that outline, underneath that, there's people historically who Allah showed as an example whose hearts have been sealed. like Bani Israel, where everything was given to them and they still rejected. Like you're talking about, well, even then we're not going to believe even if the angels come down. Like when Allah sent down not just a cauldron and a platter of food for Bani Israel, but it was cooked. Al-manna was it was ready for them. They didn't have to put any effort in. They ate, they got their musti, and then they still continued. They saw that happening, right? Imagine that. And
What's a musti? We have other people who are not brown listening to
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, musti is like a type of spoiledness. Yeah, like you get so spoiled that you just don't care. You're like almost to the level of like being belligerent. You know, like you're just so spoiled. You just walk around like cattle, and you just hope everything comes to you. Yeah. You just rest whenever you want to. You don't have any work to do. You know, I was going to use another Urdu word, but reason being is, look, when Allah seals your heart, whatever is given to you after that, you're still not going to believe. And that's what happened to Bani Israel. And the signs of that were also in the Quraysh. That's the wisdom of Allah talking about Bani Israel to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you're going to be facing these people, that even if angels were to come down, they still wouldn't believe because their hearts are now sealed. Right? And the deals that they were making, like look at the beauty of the Quran when Allah is giving Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam the expectation of what these people want from you. Allah says in the Quran, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. Right? We see the translation as, they wish that you would lighten up on them so they would lighten up on you. Right? But what does that verse actually mean? It's such a beautiful verse, and it's so visceral, because the word وَدُّوا is like they would prefer, they would be inclined, they would love to see. لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. Right? The verb that is here in the Arabic language comes from the noun, which is duhn. Duhn is oil. What do you do, especially back in the day when they didn't have moisturizing lotion? Like when I lived in the desert, after people are done eating with their hands, the oil that's remained on their hands, what do?
Lick it.
Nope.
That's what I would
after
do.
they're done licking it. Like let's say it's extra. There's a lot of fat because they cook their food in fat, right? They take the fat from their hands and they put it on their heels because they're all cracked, and they put it on the bottom of their feet.
Oh, like petroleum jelly.
Yeah, exactly. Like petroleum. So what happens when you put oil on your hands? It gets softened, right? So Allah is saying to him, He's not just saying make a compromise. Look how visceral this is. He's saying, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا, that you become soft. But duhn is actually oil. فَيُدْهِنُونَ, so they're going to become soft. So it's not just simply making deals. The deals are made to soften his heart. The ones that theirs are sealed.
Wow.
They're hoping that you would, but his heart's not going to be softened for this because his heart's not sealed. He's a prophet.
Yeah.
Right? But their heart's already sealed. So the deals that these people make are so evil and treacherous. They know that these material things are going to soften your heart if you're materialistic. Yeah. But obviously Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes the test because he's not materialistic.
Yeah.
Right? So these deals that are made, even we're just talking about even like Muslim leaders and stuff, to like even like in India, that one Mufti dude or whatever who he is, that's like talking on behalf of, the BJP, and like obviously he's given very good deals, and his heart has been on their level been softened.
What was that guy's name? Just for the listeners, I know we
can't
were
remember
talking
his
longer,
name.
But yeah,
but it was very relevant. The reason I brought that,
yeah.
that tangent up is because, look, all these things are pointing back to Bani Israel, and it happens to be those people who claim to be Bani Israel are doing the same treacherous work in front of us. The verses, look, a lot of people, they like to say, not all Jews are like I get that. And I think Muslims, unfortunately, have to keep on saying that. But it's the Jewish, what's known as a Jewish entity who represents Judaism in the people's eyes, are now performing those atrocities.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not all Jews. That's fine. Not all the Jews were evil at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously. But it's the entity for political reason who Allah was referring to. And now we see that here. History repeats itself, and it actually never changed. It just comes in different shapes and forms, right? So we see that same level of treachery and deception from the people who claim to represent Bani Israel, and the world sees them as a Jewish entity, the Zionists, and they happen to be speaking and acting the way Allah spoke about Bani Israel in the past.
A lot of Muslims nowadays, as they're reflecting over Bani Israel, why were they so chosen by Allah? What quality about them was so loved by Allah that they became the chosen people for so long, where they received so many messages and messengers after another? Was it something that was an incrimination against them, or what was the wisdom in that? Do you know?
Well, I don't know. Wallahu alam, I don't know what the exact wisdom is, why they were given so many chances. But it was a favor that was given to them based on their prophets, right? And it's an example to be used for the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu, that they were favored much more than you on certain levels. On a worldly level of getting what they want instantly, they got that. Muhammad sallallahu Ummah doesn't have that. We have a different level of trials and tribulations because we have the akhirah in compensation, right? But the example that Allah is giving, whether you want to call it gluttony, whether you want to call it complete rebellion towards Allah, because we have to remember the rebellion that Bani Israel had with Muhammad sallallahu was not simply because he was an Arab, not simply that. It was their original anger is with Allah, that Allah, billah, how dare you choose someone other than Bani Israel for prophethood? So we're not going to accept him, even though they knew he was the truth.
So
Kind of like Iblis.
Exactly.
There's a thing here. First of all, by the way, that guy's name is the one you're talking about is Dr. Umar Ahmad Ilyasi. He's a chief imam of the All India Islam Imam Organization, whatever that is. But anyways,
He's like the mouthpiece for the For the Hindus.
but coming back to this whole thing, so this could possibly also be the reason why they're chosen is from the dua of Sayyidina Ibrahim, right? What's the ayah? رَبَّنَا إِنِّي أَسْكَنْتُ مِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي. This ayah here? Yeah. And from this ayah, obviously, we know that it's not just Ismail that will be blessed, but also Ishaq. And Allah mentions in the Quran, from this progeny we bring Nabuwah.
Yeah.
We bring... So this was... And so since they happen to be the descendants of them, naturally they are a family. And they make dua. And Allah accepts the dua of the Anbiya.
Yes,
Right?
sir.
Until his qadr is different. Right, so it's like even when if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would make du'a for somebody, Allah would answer. Nobody would think about whether, like, for example, the du'a he made for Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu to have good memory. No one doubts that it happened. It in fact came true. The du'a of the Anbiya are answered, right? Generally speaking, so it could be from this. But the problem the Yahud had is, along with everything that you said, it was the entitlement. That, we will always be chosen because that's why they rely on Ibrahim alayhi salam, the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Our prophet Moses met Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He met him on our behalf. He saved us from Fir'aun in front of them. Like, they witnessed all these things. Like, the miracles they witnessed are probably greater than the miracles that the Muslims witnessed with Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not have miracles, but the extent of miracles that they witnessed, even to the point where I believe there's a hadith about this which talks about Sakrat al-Maut, and it relates to something that's common among the Jews, that during their time, even there were so many strange events, even the average Yahudi at that time would have karamat happen to them. Like, they would make dua and Allah would answer. In this particular case, there were two of them there's a narration the Prophet was saying in the past where they were by the grave. They said, let us make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we raise someone from the dead so we can ask him about the afterlife. So they prayed, and at that time the Prophet mentioned it wasn't prohibited for them to pray in the maqbarah. So they prayed, and they made dua and Allah answered it, and they raised this man. And the Prophet described him. He said he was a product of a mixed marriage, black and white. And he had the mark of sujood on his head, so he was a righteous person. And when he came out, he apparently allegedly said to these people, he's like, woe to you, I ask you to ask Allah to return me to as I was, because I died over 100 years ago, and the pains of death have just subsided from me. So, and then the Prophet went and said the reason for mentioning this was that the only people who don't experience this are the shuhada, and I'm also going to experience this. But the point being is that even the average Jew would have these miraculous events that would happen, and Allah would remind them that, hey, I'm answering your dua, you are having these blessings, right? But it was their entitlement that no matter what we do, it's almost like Allah has to choose us. Allah has to do something, waliyadu billah. And Allah made them an ibrah for us, a lesson that, you know what, you can be chosen. You can be blessed with a noble lineage of Anbiya. And they are, the true Jews are descendants of the Anbiya. Like they are literally children of the Prophet. So what a beautiful lesson too also for the Muslims. Because today you find same people who claim to be descendants of the Prophet and they're charlatans and they do all these kind of things. Your lineage to a prophet does not exempt you from what Allah commands you to do.
True. Very true. Great example.
And doesn't matter how many chances He's given you or how many, that's a benefit, meaning Allah has blessed you with this. But it doesn't mean it should be taken for granted, because Allah can take that away in a second. And Allah even then tells us Muslims that if you don't do what's right, I will remove you and raise a better nation from you.
Yeah.
We're
And
replaceable
humiliate you in this
too.
world, yeah. And humiliation in this world.
And so that's where they went wrong. So you're right. It wasn't that they didn't recognize that he was a prophet. They even recognized that there were Gentile prophets. They have at least 7 of them. They believe Lut alayhi salam was not a Jew, but he was a Gentile, right? These people, but they were upset that they had to follow a Gentile prophet.
Yep.
How dare Allah say that we have to follow him?
Yeah. And why would Bahira, the monk, say to Muhammad sallallahu or say to Abu Talib, get your nephew out of here, because if the Jews find out they're looking for him, because they know there's supposed to be a prophet emerging from Mecca, and if they find him here, they'll kill him, right? And it's very, very straightforward of the mindset. And that also, based on the entitlement, the test of them was, hey, you have to switch over to this new prophethood. I mean, if you want to call it a switchover, but we'll call it that for now. And you have to switch over. That's your test. Because if you truly believe in Allah, you will. If you believe in your lineage and your tribalism, then you're not going to, right? And that's another test, again, for all of us too, right? But, I mean, to come back full circle, the seerah that you were referring to, Sim, is very, very relevant in all times and places. People are always going to want to make deals with people who are disruptors and people who are making noise, and the powers that be don't want those disruptions to occur. When Muhammad ﷺ spoke to even the tribe of Al-Muthanna, what Muthanna said to Muhammad ﷺ is, he said, and what you're bringing, this message, kings don't like this. Yeah. Kings don't like to hear this, right? Because they're setting up all these systems in order for this type of movement to emerge that can topple them because it's pure.
You know, a fascinating thing when I was reading the Sirah with my kids was the Meccans allowed an image of Bibi Maryam, because the Christians have those, I don't know if you call them idols. I guess that's a harsh term for Christians to hear, but they have depictions of Mary that they go pray to, right?
Yeah. Iconography.
And so the Quraysh allowed the Christians who were visiting Mecca to come and paint Maryam on the Kaaba.
Wow.
They said, come on, they've welcomed all your gods. They're very accommodating.
Very democratic.
Very democratic, very, how would you say?
Pragmatic.
Not pragmatic.
No, inclusive.
They're
very inclusive.
Let's just say perennial.
Okay,
where they
universalist.
Yeah. They thought everyone was, your God's okay, your God's okay. Everyone's God's okay. So why? So I was talking to my kids. I'm like, these guys, they weren't against the Prophet just calling for belief in Allah.
That's true.
There was something more to this.
Yes, sir.
It wasn't just about because they were perfectly accommodating to other monotheistic religions. Why? Why are they allowing Maryam to be depicted on the Kaaba?
Yeah.
So think about it. So Rasulullah is not only challenging their gods, but their entire way of life, their corruption, the things that they don't talk about. They try to boast themselves to be, virtuous and noble human beings, but it's all sitting on a bed of lies, of deceit and corruption, and how they controlled and manipulated society, so that pretty much all the Quraysh, or the chieftains of the Quraysh, all the money traveled up to them, and most of Mecca was very, I wouldn't say poor, but very they weren't receiving the goods that, or the benefits of all the pilgrims coming to Mecca as they did.
Yeah.
And
so I think another point to add on to that is they wanted Muhammad to keep it just ritualistic. Keep it ritualistic, keep it within yourself. But when you're asking for changes to occur, physical changes, and belief changes, because look, belief is okay with them. it's very inclusive, like you said with the Christians. That's a great example. But once that belief becomes practical, why it becomes a problem is because all the money that we make off these idols now and all the power that we have, these two things, power and money, once it starts affecting it, because if you don't believe in idols anymore, that means all these idols have to leave the Kaaba. And every single one of those idols holds power to every single tribe. And a lot of those idols represented the tribes. And because the power that they have, they can make policy now. And people have to, the trade routes are going to be based on what they say has to be because of the power that the idol gives them. But if there's no idols anymore, they lose all the power overnight. Yeah. And they have to hand it over to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what it means by keeping it ritualistic. But now when it becomes practical, when Islam has to be implemented now, then they lose power, and they're not willing to do that. They're willing to go to Jahannam for that because they knew Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was telling the truth.
Yeah.
They're willing to, they're like, you know what, Jahannam's worth it for us because we want this world, right? And that's recurring over and over. Every single power that you see now in the world, and they're confronted with Islam, everyone has a right to their religion. Everyone has a right to peace. As long as they're peaceful. But there's a certain line that you can't go past. And when you go past that line, because it affects their policy, affects the way people see them, and affects their power, then we can label them as terrorists. We can label them as extremists in order to not only dehumanize them, but to delegitimize what they're talking about because they don't want that. They don't want that change, right? Yeah. And I think that's the true challenge that Muslims have in this world. Muslims always say we have to be like the Jews. We have to get... No, Muslims aren't meant to be like the Jews. Muslims aren't meant to have the power that you think that other people, world powers have. Our power is very different. It's a beautiful power.
Our power doesn't come from wealth.
Yes.
It comes from truth.
Yes, sir. Truth.
I think, sir. No, to his point, I think our power comes from being radically different.
Yes, sir.
From changing what they... I don't like to use the word changing, but reforming what they think is justice, what they think is worship, what they think is acceptable, changing that to something which is better, reforming it to what is better, right? And like that's exactly what the Prophet ﷺ did. We don't want to be similar to anybody else. Yes, we have a similar understanding in terms of our God, and maybe we have some overlap there, but we are meant to be visibly different than everybody else in our appearance, in our worship. I mean, we talked about, I think you mentioned this before, even the idea of the Qibla itself was made because the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted to be pointing to where he loved, but that but the essence of that was to be different from them. They say, our Qibla is now different from you.
Yes, sir.
We have nothing in common with you. And the only thing we have in common is Allah. I mean, we believe that revelations come from Allah, but aside from how we get married, how we dress up, how we pray, how we wake up in the morning, how we go to bed, how we approach our wives, how we do inheritance, how we treat the slaves, all of these things is entirely different. Even now, if you were to come with all these new modern inventions in the world and new isms and communism and socialism and all this stuff, you bring Islam to match with that, it's going to challenge that. It's going to challenge, hey, you know what? You believe in unchecked capitalism. Islam says, nope, you can't have a government run this way on this. This can't be the engine for your society. You want to have a government like communism and take every wealth from people? They're going to tell you, hey, look, you can't just redistribute wealth that's not yours. Islam challenges the very fundamental of these systems, right? And says, hey, you know what? You want to have a secular society and a total, a free-for-all? Islam will tell you, no, there has to be authority. There has to be boundaries in place, right? And people will contend with this. They'll say, well, what about this? What about that? But again, Islam came to fix that problem by demonstrating that this is a divine revelation. That's when we go back to the Quran and say there's nothing like this.
Yeah, and even people that say they don't want boundaries and everyone should be free, there's still boundaries within that. Everyone who says that still believes in boundaries. Human beings always believed in boundaries because they know, especially when they're responsible for people, there has to be boundaries, right? So no one's going to just like raise their family and their kids and be like, okay, there's no boundaries. No, there has to be boundaries. Everybody knows that.
And to be honest, Tim, I don't know if you
it's
found
very
this
hypocritical.
True or not, but a lot of times people, especially when they're arguing against Islam or maybe their own, they throw out these terms as if they mean something. Like, for example, I was talking to somebody today, and he goes, oh, look at your Muslim countries. You can't have the freedom to practice your religion. Basic human rights, they can't even get in Muslim countries, right? And I said, wait a minute, how are you tying this to human rights?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I'm like, listen, if that is the statement, let's say I use your point, right, and say, okay, this is a measure of human rights, right? So what if I have a religion, because in America you can make any religion you want to. What if my religion is that I have to kill every single cow I see, right? Will America tolerate that religion? No, right? So that means by default, then what, is America not giving you human rights then? I mean, what a silly argument. America has banned certain religions and practices, right? Like Jim Jones, the David Branch Davidians, and other things like this they've done. The Mormon practices of the Mormons, they've done that. Now, would you then argue that America is not a place of freedom and human rights, or the Western world in general? I can go to any European country you choose. They would allow me to practice that religion I just mentioned, right? So they throw these terms out, but they don't really mean anything. They're only used when they're in opposition to Islam. His point in bringing that was to say, oh, look, we want to be able to preach Christianity in Mecca, right? So he doesn't really care the fact that other people don't have the right to practice the religion. He's just using this as as a bargaining tool, or a point to demonstrate, oh, well, I want to just bring Christianity and I can't do that in your world. Why should we allow you in our world? And then, I mean, I don't want to go through the whole argumentation, but 9 out of 10 times, they don't even really understand what they're saying. These points they're bringing up, they don't even work within their own societies. These are just theoretical things. They're not practical.
It's just mental exercise.
Right, exactly. Like, well, America has freedom of speech. Well, what does that mean? Like, do I really have freedom of speech? Would mean that there's no censorship at all, right? Meaning no speech is censored. But we have censorship all the time. Yeah. You go on TV, you go on radio, you go in both in the public. It is censored speech. And anytime you have censored speech, it's not freedom of speech. Yeah. You can argue you have more free speech, but then what that comes is that we argue about, that's just a difference of opinion about what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. We're differing over the extent of the law, but every place has these boundaries. Every place has these parameters, and you can't escape that. Human civilizations need this. If we didn't, we would live in complete anarchy, and that would not be good for anything. There would be no progress and no safety.
Yeah, and now is the time. Look, there's I forget the name of the sister. She just got she was put on leave as a physician, and the Zionists on Twitter or on X completely, even though she said nothing anti-Semitic, it was on Anti-Semitic Watch or something like that, and she's on leave, and you see all the comments fire her. She said absolutely nothing anti-Semitic. She's literally just reporting as a physician what type of medical practices and how the Israeli government is impeding on hospitals and all that kind of stuff. Very, very simple. She said nothing about Jews. She said, and they literally doxed her, right? She's on leave, and they're considering revoking her license and all that, just because she reported news that happens to be about Israel, right? Like, where's the freedom of speech in that?
On that note, Sim, I sent you something on WhatsApp. I hope you can, I don't know if you can bring it up, but it's just something different. Later on, if you have it in the show, I want you guys to hear that. There's a representative by the name of Representative, I think his name is Brian, I think it's Brian something. Brian Mast, I think it's his name, right? And he is this outright just saying that we have to destroy all of the infrastructure. And when questioned about, because he said there's no innocence, but when questioned about like young 6 and 7 year old children, blatantly says they're not civilians, they're not innocent. And these are, I mean, if anybody else were to say this about like Jewish children, that 6 and 7 year old Jewish children are not innocent, it would be anti-Semitic. Go ahead, yeah. I think you have it right.
You're heartless. You are heartless. Do you realize how heartless you are?
It'd be better if we kill all the terrorists and kill everyone in their supporters.
It's not a solution.
Oh, it's a great solution.
You haven't seen the pictures of all the babies being killed?
These are not innocent Palestinian civilians across the world. When you're looking at the 500,000 people starving to death, are people that should go out there and put a government in place that doesn't go out there and attack Israel on a daily basis. So.
Kids, 7-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds.
They destroyed more infrastructure in Gaza than they did in Dresden. So that is like government
And there's
bombing.
more infrastructure that
They
needs to be
destroyed
destroyed.
more of Gaza than what happened in Dresden.
Did you not hear me? There's more that needs to be destroyed. And there will be more that gets destroyed.
We want to see them starve to death. UNRWA is what's keeping them alive.
I do want to make sure that we don't give $1, 1 penny to UNRWA and that it actually be totally
Why?
abolished.
Why?
Because
They were set up in 1948 to serve the refugees of Palestine. That's what they were created for. The UN created it because they were displaced from where they lived.
and the United Nations was moronic for creating UNRWA.
You are heartless.
You can say
Do you
that.
realize how heartless you are? These children are being slaughtered, and now you want to take away the last bit of food and water and supplies, any medicine. Do you want to take the last bit they have? That money
I'll
is
make
for.
sure your tax dollars don't go to UNRWA. I'll do everything that I can to make sure they don't go.
We don't want to.
So
Wow.
who is the guy that was speaking? What is he and what is his position?
He
Just for
is
the listeners, just if they don't know.
Representing Bryant Mast.
Yeah, Brian Mast. I don't know what state he represents. However, but I'm saying, obviously this all infuriates us, and you can see what a total a-hole this guy is. But I'm saying, just if anybody were to reverse that speech and switch Palestinians with
Exactly.
Jews,
Yeah.
right? What would be the outcome?
Yeah. Yeah. Who has the right of freedom of speech now?
Right.
Right.
And that's my point.
Whose
I
ball
mean,
is that? Yeah.
yeah.
That's a great point.
So this guy is Florida's.
Okay, Florida. Yeah. Okay, there you go. And so, I mean, we can talk a lot about how savage that is, right, and how uncivilized the stuff that he was saying. But the point being, I think we all understand that these are the kinds of people that are in power. These are the people that we're appealing to for justice. These are the people that we hope are going to make change in the world, right? Understand that these people do nothing but serve their own interests. That person gets $500,000 from Israeli lobbies. He's not going to change his mind because money is what motivates these people. Money and power. Turning to these people is not going to solve it. But I wanted you guys to hear that because you have to see exactly how they feel.
Okay, look, if I can just play devil's advocate. Now, someone can say the ceasefire initiative that Chicago mayor had basically pushed forward, how do we make sense of that? Because it seems like the appealing is working, right?
So I think it's a great gesture, right, Sim? I mean, it's a great gesture, but does it really have any meaning?
Well, I think it's just, of course, there's nothing that you can, if anyone says, or is asking or calling for a ceasefire, we of course would welcome it. I
Right.
mean, you'd be silly and stupid not to welcome that, And when you see, the thing is, these people, they don't have any power, though. Is what I'm trying to say. It's not like they have any effective force or an ability to influence Washington and how Washington's thinking is going in the Middle East. So, of course, we welcome it, but ultimately, it's the weight of it is similar to us calling for it.
Yeah, I mean, what the bottom line is, state and county, city issues have no bearing over federal issues, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, what we're talking about is Congress and the House and the President. They decide and direct policies, and they don't consult the mayor of Chicago or the governor of Illinois or any of those. The states' rights are states' rights. They're separate from the federal government. So while it's a nice gesture for maybe the benefit of it may be that it would be difficult to maybe bring a case in Illinois against someone who's being labeled as anti-Semitic. Maybe it might be a more Palestine-friendly area, which is a good thing. We welcome that.
Definitely.
But in terms of the actual effect of helping Palestinians, I'm with Sim on this. I don't think it's going to bear much in the halls of Congress and in those areas, right? That's a whole federal issue for that. Yeah, but
For sure.
it's a nice thing. I mean, I'm happy that, I mean, it shows that momentum is there and people are aware, and that even considering that Chicago is a Democratic place, that the Democratic Party is taking note that this issue is a big thing for a lot of people.
Yeah. There is there was another one. another video I had queued up here. Just
It was posted yesterday. You originally tweeted it in 2011, and you said, "I would love to write a book called Great Idiots of History. Rachel Corrie would make the list." And it got retweeted yesterday and started fizzing around the internet. When you look back at that tweet, do you have any regrets about the way you phrased that?
Not particularly. I mean, I think that Rachel Corrie, her death was tragic, but that doesn't mean that she wasn't engaged in deep foolishness. That there are many members of the West who unfortunately do act as useful idiots for terror groups. Rachel Corrie was associated with the International Solidarity Movement. She was in the Gaza Strip in Rafah, Gaza in 2003 when Israel was conducting military operations in the middle of the Second Intifada. She was blocking a site that Israel had suggested was actually being used to hide terror tunnels, which, as we now know, is a frequent tactic being used in the Gaza Strip. And she planted herself in the blind spot of a bulldozer. Her death was a tragic accident. It's tragic. That doesn't mean that she wasn't acting as a useful idiot on behalf of far more nefarious forces.
But she is a young woman who got bulldozed to death. And this was, 13 years ago, and you're a different character now. I just wonder whether, looking back on it, you would have phrased that differently.
I mean, perhaps I might phrase it differently now. Do I feel that she was a fool and that she was acting on behalf of nefarious interests? Absolutely.
wow.
Gave him an opportunity to redeem himself.
So this idiot, he is fundamentally calling someone who is an American, a white American girl who is very much representative of many Americans and how they see themselves, and he's calling her an idiot. And that had he written a book about idiots, he wouldn't add her to that list. No matter where you think about where your politics lie in this thing, the death of a peaceful protester, Rachel Corrie, made headlines all around the world. And this sick, demented individual, I'm glad he got exposed on Piers Morgan's show, where he had the opportunity to clarify himself. It's like, yeah, you know what, I said that in the moment of heat or something, but he wouldn't even take the nudge or the olive branch or whatever you want to call it from Piers Morgan, the hint.
He was giving him a hint, bro. He's like, bro, you can't be doing this.
Yeah.
I'm giving you a hint.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's complete arrogance. And look, the false sense of confidence that he's developed now because of the popularity that he's gained in the past 5 to 8 years, whatever it's been, and been utilizing that and like dropping like a weird rap song with Tom McDonald and thinking that he's going to redeem himself because he took a bit of a battering because of this Israel-Palestine war. He's doubling down now, and he thinks that he's on top of the world, and he's got a small bubble of people that he hangs out with, and he thinks that as long as he has their support, he's going to be okay. But alhamdulillah, he's destroying himself, man, and Allah's showing everybody's true colors in this, man.
Yeah, not just showing, but also this is incriminating evidence. This is things that will be displayed to the world on the last day.
Yeah.
And people understand why there's a hell.
Yes, sir.
And I think people will, right now, over the course of many shows, we had people on our show, people who were in apologetics and who tried to make sense of why there's a hell. And it seems like a very harsh punishment for disbelief. But when you have these kind of pieces of evidences and you put it all together,
like, that's why there's hell.
And that's...
But dude, this can get into a really deep topic. We could talk about this, I think, for hours. But one beautiful thing I think to take away from this is that there's levels to everything, and there's levels to disobeying Allah. There's levels to rejecting Allah. There's levels to Allah giving you opportunities to redeem yourself on a superficial level and a very deep level. And everything we do in this world is going to be, we can use similarities of it from all this oppression that's happening in this world. Like, you have to think of yourself as when this Israel-Palestine war is occurring, what side would you be on, even in your personal life, of you having the upper hand and capable of being oppressive towards somebody who's one of Allah's slaves that you're responsible for? What side would you be considered, right? Which one would you be similar to, right? And that's why there's a Jahannam, because Allah is just. Jahannam doesn't exist because Allah loves to punish people. Wal-iyadhu billah. Jahannam exists because Allah is just. That's why it exists. And Jannah exists because Allah is just, right?
Yeah.
You can't tell me that if you don't believe in Jannah and Jahannam, and obviously if you don't believe in God, then you're telling me that the IDF soldiers that are committing these atrocities, the Israeli army is committing these atrocities, and the Palestinians that are being murdered for no reason, the children, you're telling me they're all just going to go to the same place, just in the soil, and that's it? No, it's much more grand than that.
You know, the whole thing about Rachel Corrie too is that this is an average American girl who wanted to do what was right, and they can't even acknowledge that they bulldozed her. Like, if you go and research this, they tell you it was by accident, but numerous eyewitnesses was like, no, she was above the bulldozers. You could see the guy in the cabin was looking at her. But here's the point. If Ben can say, whether he thinks she was right or wrong, and say, oh, but she was the biggest fool for trying to stop them from bulldozing people's homes in Rafah, okay, in the Rafah area. Would he say that about the Holocaust people that were stupid for not fighting back? Were they the biggest fools in history for not fighting back? Or the ones that worked for the Nazi Germany in Warsaw, like in the ghetto camps, and work against their own people? Were they also fools? And I mean, the list can go on, right? If you just reverse this, would he apply that to the same people, right? Were the Israelis fools for trying to do the Nakba? I mean, doing that. Were those people who were dancing at the border, are they fools for being so close to the border, like in the middle of a war zone? I mean, you see what I'm saying? You can go down this path and call anybody fools, right? Just because you disagree with them, right? For that same logic he mentioned, anyone could make all the Israelis fools, right? Everyone that died could be fools, right? Oh, you're so stupid. Why would you, be there in that moment when you know there's a war going on, right? Right next to Hamas territory. What were you thinking, right? And so forth and so on. But it just shows you how they're able, as Sim mentioned earlier, how they're able to justify anything in their minds. They have this idea that we have this track-minded thinking that we are right and we want this and we're going to do anything to justify it. Doesn't matter. I mean, Ben just demonstrated that, and that Senator Brian Mast, he just demonstrated too. They're willing to excuse the death of civilians and destruction of infrastructure, the taking away of food, real human rights issues. They're willing to throw all that under the bus for their objective, and you can clearly see they say it without a shred of remorse, without even when given the opportunity to try to rephrase these statements so they sound more palatable. Not because Piers Morgan believes that the Palestinians are right. No, he wants to make his guest seem less radical and more civil than the other guest he had, more civil than the Muslim guest. But it's crazy how he sounds much more uncivilized because they're trying to blame all the Muslim guests for talking about sanctioning killings and all this stuff. But here you have a prominent Jewish person who is a prominent Zionist who is blatantly justifying death. Saying, oh, yeah, she died, it's tragic, but she's a fool. She shouldn't have been there. Yeah. It's basically whitewashing a death.
Yeah. Especially because it was peaceful. I mean, the lady wasn't doing anything illegal. The lady was actually abiding by what international law is prohibiting in the first place. Right? So it's all guns against them, No pun intended, but...
there is a ceasefire that's being discussed by Qatar's prime minister in Paris, where Qatar and Egypt are negotiating a ceasefire on behalf of the Palestinians.
I'm sorry, which country is Qatar and who?
Egypt.
Oh, Egypt, okay.
Anyway, so let's just go ahead and read it. It was a high-stakes trip to Washington, D.C. for Qatar's prime minister Mohammed bin Jassim Abdul Rahman bin Al Thani. That's a mouthful. This week, his country is trying to broker a deal between Israel and Hamas that would see an end to the fighting, at least temporarily. Any agreement would bring the release of at least some of the 136 remaining hostages taken from Israel during October 7th Hamas attack in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. It would also bring some respite to trapped civilians in Gaza living under bombardment and get badly needed aid to a man-made humanitarian disaster zone. After announcing a framework that Hamas is now reviewing, Athani sat down with Morning Edition host Leila Fadel. I think that we should all unite behind stopping the war, saving those lives, saving those children and those women from being killed and being chased by bombs and being chased and bombed by airstrikes, by tanks and by everything, Athani said. He warned that if the conflict between Israel and Hamas doesn't stop soon, the risk of regional war only grows. Athani's visit came at a particularly dangerous moment. The U.S. is figuring out how to respond to the killing of 3 of its reservists in a drone strike in Jordan. The U.S. blamed an Iran-backed militia, blah, blah, blah. We know about that. So the framework that they're drawing up, at least, is that Hamas releases 136 hostages, the remainder of the Israeli hostages that were captured on October 7th, and in return, the Israelis will give a 2 to 3 month ceasefire. But Hamas wants Israeli forces to withdraw as well. And I think they want a much more a lasting ceasefire, because effectively they're taking away their bargaining chip, right? You're giving up all your hostages, then what, you're going to destroy us, level us completely? I don't know if I would take that if I was Hamas. Would you give up your last bargaining chip? So it may be that they set up some kind of stages in the release of these prisoners, where after a certain stage, after a month, they give up 50, another month 100, and so on. So maybe
Well, I think
they draw it out longer.
in the stages, there should be also objectives met, right? Like, okay, the first 50, all right, food comes in. No restrictions on UNRWA, right? Or whatever, right? Next 50, we want to see, like, hospitals, the rebuilding of hospitals already, right? I mean, something like that where you allow Qatar and, like, for example, I think there's a Indonesian hospital, the Qatari hospital, they begin to rebuild what's happening there, right? Because now when you have construction workers and laborers and they're rebuilding a hospital, it makes it even harder for them to go and start bombing again, right? Because what happens is now the world is sending people in to go work and do the aid activity, right? Because right now many countries and many aid groups are kind of reluctant because it's a war zone, right? I mean, bombs are dropping. It's not feasible to move equipment around. But if there's a ceasefire and they're doing it 50 at a time, that gives them time to move equipment and workers and aid and set up communications, and it's a full-blown operation at that time. If Israel were to attack then, it's just like now you're going to war with aid workers, right?
Yeah, so look, the pessimist in me, I want you guys to, like, maybe help me work through this. Look, I think there's a superficial way of asking this, is that all Hamas has to do is give up these hostages and Israel's going to stop what they're doing. So why doesn't Hamas just give it up? Because all these people are suffering. That's point number one, right? Point number two is the pessimist in me now says that no matter what, you know, the Palestinians give up as far as hostages or whatever the case is, Israel, it doesn't make a difference for that Zionist entity because they've already started. They're in motion. They don't want to stop this movement that they have going with you know, bombarding of Gaza and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians and whatever other monetary things they have involved in their motives, right? So it doesn't really matter as far as the hostages are concerned because they've killed their own hostages, they've killed their own people on October 7th in the kibbutz, and it doesn't really matter. It's all theatrics. So how do we deal with that? Number one is that all Palestinians have to do is just give up the hostages and everything's going to be fine. And on the flip side is that it's a very pessimist way of looking at things, but it doesn't matter what they give.
So I think that's what Sim addressed. I think, why would you give all your bargaining chips? So I don't think they would want to give all that up. And that's the reason why you don't give your all your hostages up, because there's no bargaining chip. So they're not going to do that.
But what they will most likely do is they'll say, we'll give you most of your hostages back once the IDF withdraws from Gaza. Then after 2 months or 2 to 3 months of ceasefire, the remaining hostages will be released.
So what I'm saying is, but to address your second point, you're saying, well, what's the difference? Israel, even if they can wait 3 months to start bombing again, how do you prevent that, right? And that's what I'm saying. The ones that are remaining, Hamas has to be smart and negotiate and say, well, okay, in order for us to release these 20 or these 30, we want to have these hospitals, the countries that own them, like Qatar and Indonesia, and the aid that comes to them, we want the rebuilding to begin right now.
Yeah.
So they have to allow that to happen. And then after a month, they say, okay, well, we want to have a regular, the supply of food and water, right? I mean, these things that don't need to be there. But what happens is that if these are allowed, like you have construction workers and aid workers that are setting up that will have 2-3 months already on the ground in a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I get that part.
So hold on. They can't just continue, because if they do, that means they're not just killing Palestinians now. They have thousands of aid workers. Now they're going to have to answer to Britain, America, Australia, all these foreign countries that have their aid workers there, that, hey, our workers are there. You can't just start bombing. They're still
are you
there.
saying that you're hoping that this can happen? Because the
No,
reason
I'm saying they
asking
have to make these concessions.
But what I'm saying is that don't you think by now Israel has shown that it doesn't like to be put conditions on, and they would never want to put themselves in that vulnerable position where they have to abide
But they
by
already,
something.
they don't like that's a given. They don't like conditions, but they already had to negotiate the release of hostages already. They've already met conditions before. So it's not like they can't do it. It's a matter of structuring it right.
Do you think that those releasing those hostages is just kind of appeasing the other side?
No,
as optics to make it look like they're kind of helping?
No, not at all.
So what's fundamentally happening here is the United States and the West are seeing that Israel's not going to accomplish its objectives of eliminating Hamas, right? So Hamas kind of has the upper hand, but the upper hand is limited because they are also starving. I mean, people are literally eating grass in Gaza. That's how much starvation there is now. And then they decide to close the tap on UNRWA, the UN agency that supplies a lot of the humanitarian aid to Gaza, by levying some pressure. So whether they made up this thing, it's not, I don't know if it's made up or not, but what essentially is the allegation is that Hamas members or at least 3 of the Hamas members were working for UNRWA, and that consequently 12 Western countries have stopped giving aid to UNRWA as a result of Israel disclosing that there were 3 Hamas fighters who were part of this agency who I don't know if they were actually part of the October 7th attacks, but they're Hamas, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately they're using that as a justification to put pressure on Hamas to accept this agreement. That's what it boils down to. This whole they must have known this for a long time. Why is it all of a sudden UNRWA's coming under attack?
But Sim, more importantly, do you condemn Hamas?
Of course. Of course.
No, but I mean, the whole idea is, but I mean, but Hamas has to be able to take control of that vantage point, right? And say, listen, their Israeli objective was, it changed many times. One was, we're going to destroy Hamas in 2 weeks. Then it became, we're going to get rid of these tunnels. Then it became, we're going to rescue the hostages. Each one of these objectives that Israel has set for themselves, by the way, not America or any other country or Hamas, these are objectives that Israel openly admitted to. They did not succeed in any one of those. By their own definitions, by their own criteria, they have lost. They have been losing.
True.
Now their new objective is they want to create a buffer zone. They want to, push them back a little bit, have whatever it is, right? Take control of certain areas and get hostages, right? I mean, that's still what they want to do. And now what Sim was mentioning is correct, that they want to force Hamas to take a deal because it's the optics, right? Oh, Hamas we got them to negotiate. Look at their Hamas charter. They never want to negotiate, right? Blah, 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 blah. But again, Hamas needs to be strategic in this. I believe they will be. I believe there's a lot of capable people there that have negotiated with them before. They know what the strengths and weaknesses are. But it ultimately comes down to, how much, what's the tolerance as far as people starving and medical aid and food and water and shelter, right? Having some sort of normalcy in that area. What is the tolerance of the people and how much can they bear, right? And so that becomes the juggling act, right? How much can we push them and how long can we hold out? But if they can strategically do it, there's a way where they can come up on top and prevent another indiscriminate bombing, right? And I think the only way they get that really, because Israel has proven itself time and time again that it doesn't recognize any civilians. It doesn't think any one of them are civilians. On the news, they might say it, but internally, they view all Palestinians as vermin, like people that need to be eliminated. But what they cannot do is even non-Palestinians, non-Muslims who support Palestine are vermin to them. But the problem is that they are citizens of other countries, which they have to maintain diplomatic ties to. If Hamas is able to get an influx of those people in the territory, it becomes ever so hard for Israel to resume that same level of bombing and demolition and all that stuff, because now they have their aid there, they have their videos there, their journalists there, they have agencies that are in regular communication with their home governments, right? Obviously things are being monitored with money and dissemination of aid, all that stuff. It becomes an operation, and now they have to make sure they don't damage or kill all these foreign workers that are there helping to rebuild the area. Yeah. And that's a deterrent, right? Yeah. So that's the only way I see it going forward, where Hamas can have a long-standing, I guess a ceasefire where they're not bombing indiscriminately. Yeah, and I mean, just to be like very clear, there's a morale of people that's being broken internationally. And like, it's like, I just like to give an example of like, there's always an idea in the back of your mind that Hamas, like when you get broken so much, sometimes that idea that was always in the back burner, it comes forward now. And that idea is that, maybe it is because everything else is tried. Maybe Hamas just has to surrender, and it's all in Hamas's control of giving up these hostages. And people's minds are thinking that maybe that's going to stop everything. And that's out of disparity, because people are like, okay, how much is that threshold? You're talking about threshold. Like, what's the limit? How much can they actually take now with people eating grass and mud and hospital? Like, eventually, when somebody is so subdued and in such a desperate situation, even if you have to take a loss, you kind of have to do it because you don't want to lose more lives. So the reason why my line of questioning is as such is because by this war, people's morale is being so destroyed, and this is what they want, is people to start pointing fingers at Hamas now. Is all that other stuff about people being killed and babies being killed that was at the forefront, but that's moving back now. And now people are starting to kind of move towards, maybe we should just be supporting Hamas stopping all of this because we don't want more people to die. And I think that's what Israel wants. I don't know if we're at that point yet. Because there have been some strategic wins, right? Like, for example, South Africa, right? That's a big win. That Israel has to stop killing people. Right, it's just what came out there, and then you see little things like Chicago, right? I mean, it doesn't have an impact on that, but for them, public opinion is important, right? And so people, if it's all coming back to Hamas, these things wouldn't be happening, right? So there are people out there who understand and recognize, people in important positions who recognize and understand, even governments. That, I mean, I was reading somewhere that UK is considering recognizing a Palestinian state, right? Which is, now, it might just be words, but even the mere mention of that to maybe calm their public and whatever it is, but even mentioning that is something which angers Israel. Those things take away the advantage Israel has. Yeah. And so what that also does is it means that, hey, people are finally recognizing that Palestine should be a state. So maybe what Hamas did do some benefit. Right? So I don't think it's always what you're looking at. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are saying that, but my feeling is they were the ones saying that from the beginning. Yeah, that's like true. They're not it's not like they were always, pro what's going on, and they decided, oh, Hamas is now bad or the problem, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, these are the people that wanted that approach. And I want to remind them that Palestinians have tried that approach. The West Bank is an example of that.
Yes.
Make no mistake and do not forget that in the war with allegedly Hamas, they were still killing people in the West Bank.
Yes, sir.
They were still harming them and running raids on them. And they are an entirely separate entity. And this is in collaboration, because what happens is if Hamas is gone, what's going to come? There's going to be a similar government, if not Fatah, another similar type of government that is in the pocket of the Israelis.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that Fatah turns a blind eye, the Palestinian Authority turns a blind eye to Israeli incursions on that region. If they want to come and get somebody, they just look a different way. They get a coffee break, and the Israelis come in, pick up the Palestinian, go across the border. In some cases, they've even hand delivered them to them.
You know what they call the incursion into the hospital in Jenin? It's called a criminal.
Yeah,
It's criminal. That's what what Fatah said to Palestinian Authority said about the Israeli incursion or the murders that they'd committed in the hospital.
right. And so what I'm saying, though, is that, so I want to remind these people that by Hamas giving up, the alternative is you have something like Fatah. And they were not safe when Hamas was being attacked.
That's a great observation. I'm glad
So
you mentioned that.
if you are
Very
expecting that Israel to become civilized, keep in mind this narrative that Hamas is the problem is what they want you to think, but
Exactly.
it's really not the issue here. Yes, Hamas has a part because of October 7th, but this conflict did not start with Hamas.
Yeah.
Hamas is a result of the Nakba.
Yeah.
Is a result of 40 years of occupation and abuse and theft and killing and murder and rape. Hamas is a response because it was created in the 1980s. This conflict goes back to 1948.
Yeah.
So Hamas wasn't just the reason why Israel decided to take land and decided to occupy you and decided to shut off things and take away water and food. No, Hamas is in response to what Israel did. So if you think by not having Hamas around that this problem would go away, then you're ignoring 40 years of history.
The idea that you can cut off funding to a UN organization that is responsible for feeding not just Gaza but the West Bank, their funding also goes to Lebanon and other countries as well, that you're going to cut off funding just because some of their employees, 3 specifically, were part of the attack is incredible. Like you blame the entire organization for the acts of 3 people.
No, why not just dox them like you want to dox other bad apples that are in companies? Why don't you just do the same thing to them?
Yeah, well, you just like when they are blaming an employee, right, at a company in the United States for being pro-Palestinian or pro-resistance, right? Would you shut down the entire company? Should the United States government effectively break up the company and say that, hey, you're not allowed to operate in our country anymore because someone or a group of people in your company had beliefs against Israel? It doesn't make sense.
Totally.
This is why this is a coordinated effort to not just squeeze Hamas during this critical period where they want them to agree to the ceasefire, but also to get people from Gaza to leave. They want Palestinians to leave, and they want them to migrate out. So this is part of that ethnic cleansing plan that most of the European countries and the United States are in agreement with.
Yeah.
So
Another point to make is that, fine, let's say we agree with their standard. Oh, UNRWA is a Hamas-run organization, right? Let's just go full blast, right? They're funded by, these people who are funding Hamas, right? Okay, we got to shut them down. Okay, fine. If that's your claim, then let's hold that standard. At one point, Israel was funding Hamas as well. So should we just simply not, should we ban these governments and countries from doing any work with Israel now? Or giving them money? Because at one point they were channeling money to Hamas under Shimon Peres, right? So are we going to apply that standard? Obviously not. So the point being is that this is not about who gave money to Hamas or who gave support to Hamas. This is not what it is. Because time and time again, we've also heard that Israel itself is not clear about who a Hamas member is and who isn't. At one point, we've heard that there's only 15,000. At one point, we've heard that all of the Palestinians are Hamas because they elected Hamas. Right? Every single one, even the one who didn't vote, is part of because they didn't rebel against Hamas. So they are Hamas. So even by the Israeli standard, we don't even know who a Hamas member is. It's at their discretion. They can label anyone Hamas. They could label Rachel Corrie Hamas, which is in fact what Ben Shapiro tried to do. That she was a nefarious actor, right? They can label anyone with this label of terrorist. That Hamas is synonymous with terrorism now. And terrorist is a political term used to demonize your opponents.
You know, an interesting strategy when you see Norman Finkelstein talk about Hamas, it's very smart. He doesn't fall into this trap of making Hamas into a bad guy. Yeah, he might condemn what happened on October 7th and stuff, but what he will say, this is a natural consequence of occupation, of occupation, of ethnic cleansing, of mowing the lawn, and he refuses, but he has that kind of the ability to do that because he has that layer of being Jewish, right?
Yep.
He and his
Holocaust survivor.
His parents are Holocaust survivors, so he has that ability, that kind of street cred, where no one will ever accuse him of being anti-Semitic or a supporter of terrorism. You know, so it's interesting to learn from. At least maybe you can't say it in that respect, but at least maybe you could internalize how he speaks about it in a very intelligent way, so that people can't really call him a Hamas supporter, but he's saying that this is a natural consequence of resistance.
Yeah.
Right. So to sum it down, I mean, all he's saying is that Hamas didn't exist in a vacuum. That's all he's saying, and he's demonstrating how, by demonstrating documented practices by the Israeli military, what they've been doing, what they've claimed to want to do, what their future plans are, the way they describe Palestinians. I mean, I think what the South African presentation at the ICJ did was wonderful. They highlighted and documented not only Israeli objectives, but even Israeli IDF soldiers parroting these objectives about what they're going to do, what they want to do. We've heard things about even Israeli broadcasters on state-run media talking about it doesn't stop in Palestine. It's going to come to Lebanon. It's going to come to Egypt. It's going to come to Jordan. It's going to come all over. And he's saying, you people, not Palestinians, you Muslims are going to face this. Their objective is not just with Palestine. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If this is allowed and if this continues, make no mistake, they're going to, if they can get this land, they're going to go after surrounding land.
From the river to the sea.
Because they're acting with impunity. And they know that. And they know right now that for whatever reasons, whatever they may be, people are unwilling, people in positions of power are unwilling to hold them accountable. And we know the reasons why. There are numerous reasons. It could be religious, political, monetarily, whatever. But they have that advantage point right now. But if you can demonstrate that this problem does not start October 7th, nor does it start in the 1980s, nor does it start in the 1960s. It starts in 1948. That's when this problem starts.
All right. Lastly, not second to last. We have the United States preparing for a strike on Iran or targets related to Iranian interests. We're not exactly sure what's going to happen, but this is as a result of the strikes that the group, what's it called?
The Houthis, you mean?
No, these are the Hezbollah fighters who struck the Americans, the 3 American soldiers in Jordan. So in response to that attack, the United States is preparing a counter response. This is speculated that they may strike within Iran. Some are suspecting that they may just simply attack or strike at targets that are related to Hezbollah or other proxy fighters that are related to Iran. So the situation is escalating. My guess, or at least my look at it, is that they don't want to escalate. The United States can't afford another war. They can't escalate this into another regional war. What will likely happen is some smaller targets will be hit that will probably cause Iran to get really upset, but not enough to have a response. So because what happens, at least in these types of engagements, is measured responses from each side. Thinkers will look at the attack and they'll say, oh, well, how do we respond in an equal way, but not too much that we end up having to receive more attacks. So that kind of a negotiation goes on back and forth in dark rooms in the White House and in Tehran, where they're going to be looking at how to respond to each type of hit. And sometimes things go out of control. And like this attack that happened to kill, I don't think that group even, their name is Kataib Hezbollah. Kataib Hezbollah. Yeah. And I don't think they envisioned that drone actually hitting. I think they were just like sending a message or something. Because usually, like, what happened was the drone was supposed to get shot down by the base, by the defenses in the base. But at that same exact time, there was a landing that was happening as well of an aircraft, of an American aircraft.
The crisscross.
And the radar mistook that the drone for a friendly, and it ended up killing 3 American soldiers. So it's very complicated.
So question: did Iran admit to directing the attack? No, right? Okay.
No,
so Iran's probably going to play. We didn't have nothing to do with this. They did it on their own. This is for Palestine, whatever. Okay, but I look at this and I'm like, man, like if you look at the current American engagement in the Middle East, you've got involvement in Syria, involvement in Israel, Palestine, involvement in Lebanon, and now an involvement in Yemen, and then now to drag in Iran. I look at this with the upcoming election. This is the election year. There's, obviously public opinion counts.
Yep.
I understand that Sim is saying that they can't afford to be in this, but at sometimes politically, can they afford to take inactivity? Meaning, does this make? I think Biden is stuck between a rock and a hard place. If you don't do something, it makes Iran look like that they can get away with anything.
And the American public are going to be like, hey, they get away
scot-free. Say, hey, we're not safe. Because America sees this as American soldiers are hit, regardless of whether they should be there or not. Yeah. They see it as an attack on America, right? And then number 2, though, but then you have the other side that says, well, look at all the wars Biden's starting, right? Now we're in Iran now, right? Yep. Like under Trump, there was no war, right? So I guess the Biden administration is going to have to figure out what majority of the American public feels. Like, are they leaning towards response? Like are they having this visceral response, like 9/11 type thing, where you got to get them, right? Where they had to act, or is it going to be more like what they wanted when the Trump was? Who cares if Khashoggi died? We're not going to lose billions of dollars, right? We don't want to go to another war, right? So it's going to be a difficult thing for them to kind of figure out and see what people want. But I wonder what the implications of that are, right? Because that shows now that this is an opportunity for Russia and China to move closer to these places, right? And that's another thing that America has to watch out for, right? Because they're trying to push that back. They're trying to push back that Chinese and Russian influence. Russia is gaining stronger influence by obviously supporting its partners there, but also with the Ukraine starting to ramp up again. Like, he's really bombing heavily. He's not backing down. China has seen as a new partner that has brokered meetings between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they're looking to even now potentially broker something between Yemen and Israel. Like, they're trying to essentially be this agent of change or stability in that region, and in I guess if they don't take a response to what happened, it makes China look more like they're in control. Like no one's bombing them. They're able to negotiate, talk on the table. So that's another thing they have to worry about, the optics of how this looks to other emerging world powers, or at least people who are contending for, the being the number one spot. And so I don't know. I mean, and then potentially does this activate more Houthi aggression? Like if they want to go after Lebanon, are the Houthis now going to? Because if you're saying
That's true.
Kataib Hezbollah, if they're obviously a proxy of Iran, and I'm sure these groups who are tied to Iran all feel the same, meaning that, hey, one for all for one, right? So if they're going to attack, if they can attack and do things for Palestine, I would assume they would do the same thing for their own brethren who are in the same type of militia group in Lebanon too, right? Like they would probably have some activity. Like we don't want America to be involved here. They have no business being here, right? And so, there's a number of things to consider. I don't know which one they're going to consider or what is going to unfold here. Maybe I'm all wrong about all of them, but I think these are all certainly things that the White House and the Pentagon are going to be considering when they have these discussions about how and when and who to attack.
Lastly, Imran Khan has been imprisoned or sentenced to 12 years in prison.
And his wife.
Bushra.
Oh, his wife too. I didn't know.
Yeah, I don't know why. Some corruption thing, but yeah.
They're charged with selling state gifts to the state and disclosing state secrets. One of those is probably plausible, where he disclosed on state TV that the United States directed Pakistan to get rid of him. So there was a cable that was sent to Pakistan, and I think, as in the interest of the average Pakistani, every Pakistani should have the right to know that their government is not in their control, that this democracy is a sham, that the United States is directing influential people, the military and other individuals within their government, to act on their behalf. And that's incredibly problematic as an average Pakistani, to know that your democracy is not legitimate. And I think Imran Khan did the right thing by informing the Pakistani people that, hey, look, our government received instructions that they don't want this to happen, that they don't want, because Imran Khan, what he got in hot water for was talking to Russia and trying to negotiate with Russia when the United States was actively trying to cut Russia off from the entire global economy during the Ukraine conflict. And
also trying to control Pakistan under IMF loans. Pakistan did not want to go to the IMF because they get tired of it. So they're trying to make trading partners as they're moving closer to China and Russia. Yeah. Right? They're looking for other partners who can, and this is aligned with BRICS, right? Like, the whole idea that they wanted to try to strategically align with Russia because they see them as a better trading partner, oil and other things. Because at that time, Pakistan was suffering an energy crisis, right? They could not get, and Russia obviously has a source of oil, and so obviously getting oil from America has conditions, right? They have to get loans, they have to do this, and IMF has their own conditions, and Imran Khan wanted none of that. And one of the ways America controls other countries in the world is by the IMF, right? These are ways they are forever indebted to the IDF, and these loans are conditional not just on paying them back, but other things like
non-compete,
gender studies, and trans rights and women's initiatives and all sorts of things. They're packaged deals, and if you don't want to accept them, you don't qualify for IMF loans, right? So it's almost like you have to accept their agenda in order to qualify for loans. And so Imran Khan at that point, I think for whatever reasons, obviously the known ones, didn't want to work with that. And one of the reasons why Pakistan was in the mess it was in the first place was because of these huge loans it couldn't pay back. It was indebted and it was pigeonholed by these loans. And so he was trying to move away from that model. And America didn't like that.
This is actually 14 years. Sorry.
Oh, here we go. Poor Imran Khan, 14 years. How old is he, by the way? 65, 60s, 70?
Why don't you look it up?
Yeah, I'm going to look it up right now.
Pakistan's incarcerated former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been served to 14 years for corruption. His Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, PTI party, said on Wednesday in the second legal blow to the beset to beset the beleaguered politician this week. Khan and his wife Bushra Bibi were convicted by the National Accountability Bureau in a case related to the unlawful sale of state gifts during his tenure as Prime Minister from 2018 to 2022. Khan, who has been jailed since August on several charges, has also been barred from holding office for 10 years, the PTI said. Bibi was taken into police custody shortly after the sentencing, the party added. Wednesday's sentencing comes almost 1 week from a general election expected on February 8th, and just a day after Khan was handed a 10-year sentence for leaking state secrets. He will be allowed to serve his sentences concurrently. Pakistan's upcoming election is seen by many analysts as one of the least credible in the country's nearly 77-year history, owing to the military crackdown on Khan and his aides. Khan maintains widespread popularity amongst Pakistan's largely young voters who view him as a clean break from the political dynasties or military establishments that ruled the South Asian nation for much of its independent history. Pakistan, wake up, man. You all have to go out on the streets and bring this government down. This is where is your will to fight? For how long are you going to be under the yoke of these people who are not in your interest, or who are in the pocket of Washington? You guys have to get up out of your chair, go out on the streets and demand for Imran Khan's freedom. That's the only way you're going to get any. The man was the only thing close to bringing any semblance of respect and independency, and removing the yoke of economic servitude to the West. It's as clear as day. I mean, it's ultimately in the hands of the Pakistani people and how much they're willing to sacrifice, because no one else is going to sacrifice for them. They're going to have to fight. They're going to have to fight because they're not. These people are just putting in prison anyone who doesn't play ball with them. They want people who are crooks just like them.
And and to be honest, like, this is your chance, because I just looked it up, he's 71 years old. So 14 years in prison, he'll be 80 if he makes it in prison. He'll be 85 if he can get out. By that time, I mean, more than likely statistics have it that he'll probably die in jail, right? Yeah. So if there's a chance for someone different to change your country, right, now is that time. And you guys have rioted before, right? I mean, when he first went, they had to stop the proceedings because they were going after the I think the local police stations and army barracks, and they were setting them on fire. I'm not encouraging all that violence, but what I'm saying is that something has to be done. You cannot allow your government to be manhandled by foreign governments. The whole creation of Pakistan was to be this autonomous, this sovereign Muslim country that had the ability to rule itself and have self-determination. If you don't stop what's happening now, the entire effort for the creation of Pakistan, the sacrifice of Muslims in that region, the dedication, the endurance of all these different and trying situations, is all for nothing.
Yeah. That's true, but what do you say to those
No, wait, hang on. There's someone. Please don't tell people to fight from the comfort of the United States. Listen, you little punk. We fight the fight no matter where we are, whether we're in America, whether we're in any country. You have to fight for your freedom. No one's going to fight for you, whether you're in Pakistan or Palestine or any place in the world. You have to fight. Or else people are going to walk all over you. They're going to kill you, and they're going to destroy you, and they're going to make your life miserable.
And look, and it's not coming from a place where like Pakistan is other than us, right? We're not saying it in the sense that we don't belong to Pakistan, or we don't share anything with people of Pakistan, and you guys got to get your act together and we're all good. That's not what we're saying, right? And I understand what he's talking about. Superficially, it can make some sense, right? But in reality, we're saying this as Muslims, and Muslims are sick of Muslims being trampled all over. That's where that sentiment comes from. But I think people do have that feeling also, is that are we willing to let these people, is it a good trade-off where for the time being we let these crooked people continue because we don't want another civil war, we don't want to have bloodshed, we don't want to have, you know, the past bloody, like in the late 90s of what Karachi was and what Pakistan was, you know, with the Sunni and Shia fighting and all that kind of stuff. We don't want that again. So, you know, and look, I can see both sides. I get what you're saying, even to like the commenter. I know what he's saying, but let it be known it's not coming from a place where, hey, we're, you know, you guys got to get your act together and we're just going to sit here. That's not actually what it is. All Muslims want to see, especially Muslims that are grounded, they want Muslim countries to thrive, and they want Muslims to have some type of dignity and honor in this world, right? And in order with some types of people to get honor, you have to be able to speak up your mind and you have to be able to protest, right?
Yeah. So here's the thing.
These are the kind of people who like to. These are the people who are Uncle Toms. They justify people being in power, walking all over them, killing their children, imprisoning political opponents for however long,
Just simply
torturing
them,
people. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, don't tell us to fight. Well, what the hell else are you going to do? You have to you have to fight for your rights, whether it's by protesting, whether it's by boycotting, what by any means necessary. You have to fight with whatever you have available to you.
So what I think we're saying when we say fight, for every person that fight means something different. For the one in Pakistan, it may be protesting in the street. For someone outside of Pakistan, it may be donating to people that are trying to bring Imran Khan back. For other people, it may be speaking about this issue. Like, you know, a lot of times people, I'll be honest with you, I'm not trying to toot our own horn, but the stuff we talk about, a lot of people don't want to say in public because there are consequences. You don't think that we put our necks on the line? Like, I mean, maybe it's not a physical thing, but we have jobs, we have families, we could be doxxed, right? You don't think that you think the American government likes the fact that we're mentioning these things and saying that, telling people to be aware of what the American government is doing in other places? Of course this brings attention to yourself. Of course these things happen. It's easier for us to talk about the NBA and UFC and talk about all this nonsense. We can do that too. No problem. Have a fun podcast and make money off of it. We could do that. But we're doing what we can do. But everybody has to do what they do, and that's their fight. It doesn't mean that you have to be violent, or that's defined for everybody differently. If you're being oppressed physically, then you have to fight back physically. Meaning if someone's going to take your house or take your life or take your land or harm your family, that's physical for you. If somebody, and now it can also be words, right? Saying that, hey, Pakistanis need to make it very clear who they want and what they want is the same thing we'd say for any other place. Pakistan is a microcosm of what's happening in Muslim world.
Yeah.
It's not anything different. Pakistan is not the exception. It's the norm. And that's why we say that, just like we advise our brothers in Gaza to stay fast and stay steadfast, and to Muslims to continue talking about this issue, even though people are deadbeat tired of hearing about it, and they're, we're still talking about Palestine. It's important to us. We could talk about a million other things right now, but we've chosen to specifically keep this topic alive because it's important to us. It's what we can do. Sure, our ratings might drop. People might not want to watch. They may be bored of it, but that's not our concern. We're doing our part.
Well said, bro.
And if your part is in rallying behind people who are supportive of Imran Khan, or rallying behind the Palestinians, or rallying behind the people of Yemen who are going to be bombed, or rallying behind the Muslims in India, or rallying behind the Uyghur Muslims in China, then that's your cause. I mean, that's the least you can do.
Look, many people criticized the people, the Rohingya, for not fighting, but then what happened? They organized. And they fought. They have legitimate resistance groups now in Rohingya. People will murder you. They don't care. This is ultimately, when it comes to power and how people leverage power, it's violence.
It's either kill or be killed.
Kill or be killed. That's the way. That's what the United States understands. To the smallest resistance fighter in any small part of the world. Ultimately, that's the highest expression of conflict.
Yeah.
And in order for you to leverage or demonstrate that you have any power, you have to fight for it.
Yeah, and even on
Might
American
is right.
citizens. No, even on American citizens. Look, I know a lot of people don't like to hear, the word of Anwar al-Awlaki, but look what Jeremy Scahill covered very well in his documentary Dirty Wars. That it was so crazy that I don't know, was it a month later or a few weeks later that they killed his son in possibility that he might grow up to be like his dad, and a few years later killed his daughter to eliminate all types of, and let's not forget he was an American citizen that they killed, right? For what they consider to be inciting terrorism, whatever the case is. They didn't bring him to justice even though he's an American citizen, right? So in order to even see that threat, the American government will kill people, even its own citizens, right? It happens. And that's the world that we live in. You know what I'm saying? So when you're talking about the Rohingya, I'm glad you brought that up, is they understand the reality of this world because they had to deal with it on a very, very real level. And they armed up and they knew they did what they had to do, right? And Americans have that passion too, bro. They're like, why do people want to keep their guns in the Second Amendment? Because what's the thing that they harp on all the time? Just in case the government becomes tyrannical, we can fight the government.
They're talking Civil War already.
Yeah, don't tread on me. That's
Yeah.
the whole idea. And how do they safeguard that don't tread on me? By having guns.
Yeah, exactly. And
They
now we
make
might even be. I don't know how serious you guys think this is as becoming the Civil War. In
I think
the
they
South,
love
but,
money too much to get into a civil war.
But nonetheless, it still stands. It's every society knows that it's either kill or be killed.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the whole Civil War stuff. I think that's a dangerous thing that many people are talking about. I don't think they really mean it. I don't think they really understand what it comes.
I think
what
it's kind of
happens
fear mongering. I think it's fear mongering too, a little bit.
It's called dog whistling. You call other people to join your camp about separating America or Texas from the rest of America, or a group of like-minded states from the rest of the nation. And I don't think the typical American has a stomach for that. Typically, until the government or the people or the country you're living in isn't able to provide for you, they're not able to provide food, water, shelter to you, people won't fight. And
I think
I don't think we're at that point yet. We're at the point where it's getting difficult for people to find shelter. People can't afford homes anymore in the United States. People have this misconception of them. The United States as this palace and stuff. That's just a few suburbs here and there in Chicago where some select few are benefiting from, but the majority of the United States is very much poor, and they're not doing very well, and people are getting fed up, and they're looking for people to blame, but they're looking for the border crossings to blame. They're trying to blame the influx of immigration and all this other stuff, but they don't realize like their own government's just stealing from them. They're printing money left and right, funding all these wars all across the world to maintain their hegemony. And what does that hegemony do? Even if it is maintaining hegemony for the betterment of the average Joe, it's not. The average person is working more, getting paid less. Inflation's not keeping up with their wages.
Wage stagnation.
It's all kinds of hell that many Americans are facing.
And
most Americans are
I believe to have like civil war, the preamble for that is poverty. Like there has to be, Maslow's hierarchy. If the bottom ones are not met, then because people don't actually think, I'm going to go out and fight. What they think is that I got to get what I need. And when they turn to desperation, they're forced to behave in ways they don't normally behave. And then when that becomes the norm because they're just trying to survive, things descend into chaos, right? Like if it's normal to go into a store and rob it to get food, or to break into somebody's car or house because you're trying to get a few cents in change or whatever it is, or take something from the fridge, right? That's when that chaos or that anarchy becomes normal, and then resistance groups and militias and things, they get involved because now everybody's trying to protect their own. And then they end up thinking, well, there's got to be a better way, right? And then they get band together to try to form something that's structured, right? And then they start all over again. But the preamble for all of this has to be where people don't have jobs, they don't have shelter, food, things like that. The basic needs are not met. Security, shelter, and food, right? These things, if they're in any way affected, that's when you have to start worrying about like real,
War.
like turbulent times. Yeah.
Folks, make sure you throw a comment in the comment section below with whether you think that there's going to be a civil war in the United States. What your thoughts are related to the IDF. Sheikh, you have any comments that you would like the listeners to comment on?
No, not at all. Not at all.
You were making faces.
He saw Imran Khan come in the chat, so he got happy. That was the real Imran Khan.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I know that's the real Imran Khan, but yeah, anyways.
Thank you all for joining us this Wednesday evening. We have another show for you guys Saturday. I don't know who's our guest, but we'll announce it later.
Inshallah.
Otherwise, we'll see you all next time. Assalamu alaikum.